Welcome to Yājñavalkya and Gargī, the yoga of non-duality. Before we dive into our restorative yoga practice, and I share with you this story of resilience, I'll invite you to just allow your breath to come and go with more awareness, perhaps even your exhales to be a little longer and softer. And if you wish to join me in a resolution for cultivating compassion, kindness, gratitude, and patience for yourself and for everyone else simultaneously, then you're welcome to repeat this mantra after me. It begins with Om. Om is a signifier for our ideal way of being in this world. And Sahana Vavatu means may we protect each other. Saha now Bhunaktu means may we uplift each other, support each other. Saha Viryam Karavavahai means may our strengths help us work well together. And then Tejas Vinava Dhi Tamastu Mavid Vishavahai, when things become hard and friction occurs, may we find the strength, or the wisdom rather, Dhita, to not resent each other. And these are the qualities that help us succeed in yoga. And this particular mantra, which you'll find at the beginning of many Upanishads, is definitely older than the Yoga Sutra, and perhaps even from Yājñavalkya and Gargī's time. So the last line is Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, peace, 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 peace in my heart, peace in yours, and everyone else's. Feel free to sing with me. Sahana Vavatu, your turn. Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam, Sahaviryam, Karavavahai, Karavavahai, Tejas Vinava, Tejas Vinava, Didamastu, Didamastu, Ma Vibhashavahai, Vibhashavahai, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Our first posture this evening will be called Viparita Karani Mudra, the stairway to heaven. This will best be done with the help of a wall, though you could modify it with a strap or a chair. The easiest way to do this pose for the 8 minutes that we will be here is with a bolster or a blanket underneath your back. And if you're up against the wall, you want to get close enough to it where you can just lean up against it and relax. So for that, sit up on the edge of your blanket or bolster with your tailbone touching the wall, and then bring your shoulder down and roll over onto your back. That's how you get your legs close to the wall. And you can simply shift away so that you're as comfortable as possible. So you can relax all of your muscles, let go of all the tension, and fall into a comfortable stillness. Now, if a wall is not available, you can always rest your legs over a chair. So your legs are just higher than everything else, with or without the bolster. Or you could always wrap a strap around your feet if you're in the middle of the room. But the target of this posture is to set your body up so well, be it upside down, that you can let go for a few minutes and just allow your body to acclimate to this shape. Of course, you can make adjustments from time to time if needed. You can even come out of the posture entirely if that's what you want. But for you to receive the benefits of having your legs and maybe even some of your torso upside down, higher than your heart for a few minutes, try to be still without clenching your muscles. And do what you can to soothe your mind by allowing your exhales to become longer and softer. Don't even worry about the inhales, just let them take care of themselves. But allow each exhale to be long, dirgha, and subtle, sukshma. Our story begins with neither Yājñavalkya nor Gargī. As you're getting settled into your version of Viparita Karani Mudra, perhaps tending to the exhales to make them longer and softer, I'm going to instead bring your attention to Yājñavalkya's teacher, who went by the name of Aruni. According to some scholars, Aruni is the first known philosopher in all of history, which is somewhat of a shocking revelation, as the West seems to think that they invented philosophy, where it seems to have originated even earlier in the East. Aruni is considered to be a philosopher of great importance, as his questions eventually led to this view that we now call Advaita Vedanta, or non-dual philosophy. Once Aruni, who was living with his guru, Dhaumya, was given the hard task of going to repair a breach that had happened in his crop field. If the breach was not fixed, then as the rains occurred, it would flood and destroy all of his crops. So he trusted Aruni to go and figure out the issue and solve the matter, as everyone's livelihood that year depended on it. Aruni, when he finally realized how the crop field had been breached, he also realized that he was not going to be able to fix it like his guru Dhaumya had hoped. He did not have the tools or the elements with which to fix the breach. However, knowing how much weight there was for him to do this, he did come up with the idea that he himself could lay his body down to fix the breach. So he laid down to fix the breach in the irrigated wall so that his back would serve as the wall. And he laid there as it rained and as the water started flowing, and all throughout the night, in the cold, in the wet, he simply laid there knowing that he was saving lives by dedicating his body. It even occurred to him that he could die doing this, but he somehow felt a sense of kinship with all the lives that he was saving, and that feeling of goodness that allowed him to persevere despite his body and the urge to run away coming up every few seconds. Early the next morning, his guru Dhaumya had wondered, where was Aruni? He was supposed to have fixed the breach last night. I haven't seen him since. I haven't seen him either. Well, the crops haven't flooded, so he must have been successful. And sure enough, they eventually found him there, still laying down, still preventing the water from flooding the crops. And his guru said, "Aruni, what are you doing lying down in the field? Get up now, get up at once." And Aruni said, "Dear Guru, I hear that you want me to get up, but if I do that, your field will flood. So I must lay here to fix the breach that you had asked me to do." And Damya said, "Oh, I see." And finally it set in what great sacrifice, what noble and extraordinary feat Aruni had performed for everyone's sake. As people came with the materials and the means to replace Aruni with proper mud and land to prevent the flood, it was at that point that Damya renamed Aruni Udalaka Aruni. This honorific was something that stayed with him for the rest of his life and informed his teaching. Udalaka Aruni was a philosopher that asked all the hard questions, not only about origins, but about what reality, what truth, and what the nature of them are. In his experience where he laid down his life to protect his family and friends, one of the things that got him through it was the realization of impermanence, anitya, that this too shall pass. When you're realizing impermanence in a state of concentration, where your attention is no longer restless, stupefied, or even distracted, but it's unified, clear, calm, and able to reflect reality and truth with less distortion, one can realize that anything that has a form is impermanent. Anything that has a shape, anything that has a beginning, also has a middle and an ending. And this was something that Udalaka Aruni realized directly. But even though he knew that his really hard night would eventually come to pass, it was something else that allowed him to deal with the intense cold and the knee-jerking sensations to run away. And this was the realization of what's sometimes called subtle impermanence. Subtle impermanence, constant change, is where you can see that not only is everything changing over time, and like 100 years from now, much of Asheville will not be the same, but subtle impermanence is where we can observe transformation happening directly, instant by instant, one breath at a time. And in contrast to impermanence and subtle impermanence, Udalaka Aruni asked if there was something eternal and unchanging. This eventually led to a famous dialogue with his son, Shvetaketu, in one of the Upanishads, where Udalaka Aruni presented the idea of the Atman. Much like the first law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Atman, the self, from which everything emerges, within which everything arises and to which everything returns, is that imperishable, impermanent, or permanent self. And he also came up with the idea of Advaita, non-duality. He proposed that Brahman, the substrate of all existence, both changing and unchanging, lacks the intrinsic nature of being non-self. Okay? Thus, Brahman and Atman are not separate. They are not two. Tattvamasi. This came from the 9th century before our common era, Uddalaka Aruni, and one of his famous students, which he had many, but one of his famous students is none other than Yājñavalkya. Feel free to remain here in the stairway to heaven. The experience of having your legs upside down can be immediately beneficial for the veins, beneficial for the arteries over time, even emotionally helpful, but you are ready to move on to some more exciting and nourishing restorative postures, please consider bending your knees, rolling over to your favorite side, which you're welcome to linger in if you want. But eventually, please find your way up to a comfortable enough seat where you can be upright. If you have the bolster, sit on the bolster, and this will elevate the pelvis a little higher than your knees. From here, we're going to just kind of let things settle and then do some spinal movements. So we'll start off real subtle. Consider placing your hands on your knees, and with your long, unrushed exhales and inhales that are just natural, however they need to be. Consider moving your spine from side to side at first, kind of like a bowling pin that won't fall, or a metronome. And then to be even more subtle with it, without clenching your muscles, try to send waves from the tailbone to the crown of your head. So you're not really trying to clench or grind or stretch, just freely move your spine from side to side, kind of like how a snake moves. And then from here, consider doing something front to back in a similar fashion. If you want, you can just lean forward and back, find your center that way. Or even round your spine forward, kind of like a cow, back like a cat. But then for subtlety, try to send waves up the spine from the tailbone to the crown. And then lastly, we'll do some rotation. Try to send spirals up the spine, kind of like old school barbershop signs, from the tailbone to the crown, and both the clockwise direction a few times, as well as counterclockwise. The gentle movement done back and forth without clenching your muscles can immediately improve circulation along the spinal column to the joints, synovial fluid, and it's something good to do if you ever have a back seize up on you. Rather than trying to stretch it out, just do these gentle movements, and you're more likely to get your normal back sooner than if you were to try to stretch. So our next restorative yoga pose is going to involve using your bolster. So if you put your bolster at one side of your mat, you can then place your blanket where you might need it. For those of you who have neck challenges, I'll recommend that you take your blanket, however folded, this is the standard fold, 3 times in half. If you fold it one more time in half that way, it makes a nice platform for your head to land on. So this is called the reclining caterpillar or the reclining butterfly. And in either case, you'll want to be not right up against the bolster, but about maybe a block width away, hand width away, a decimeter. So that way your upper back and your head rest on the bolster, but your lower back is a little free to adjust as needed. In the sleeping caterpillar, your legs can be straight, And if you can't tell my shoulders, I want you to tuck one shoulder blade at a time towards the middle, palms facing up. So that way you get the best circulation for the time you'll be here. Maybe even a little bit of an opening in the front of your heart. The sleeping butterfly is much like the caterpillar, where you bring the soles of your feet together. For some people it's not a stretch, but for some people it is. And because we're going to be here for a similar length of time, you can always make it milder by putting one foot next to the other rather than together. So it's just a subtle release of tension here and nothing overbearing. While you're getting settled in the sleeping caterpillar or butterfly, I'm going to ask you to focus not just on the exhales and let the inhales take care of themselves, but I want you to become very awake at the very moment that your exhale comes to an end and the inhale begins. So I want you to just become aware of every time the exhale stops and transforms into the inhale. All right? You might try to tense up to control your mind so that you can be aware of that important shift in the breath. But I just want you to become aware of that space at the end of your exhales before the inhale begins, without over-controlling or tensing too hard. This will help you develop the ekagra, one-pointedness, that allows you to not only be more present with your mind, however it is, or other people or the world, but also to focus your attention in such a way where you can redirect the flow of things so that you can experience deeper states of meditation that would be similar to Uddalaka Aruni's non-duality. Our story continues with the sage Yājñavalkya. He was married to a woman named Katyayani and had 4 children, happily married. However, his teachings of Uddalaka Aruni's non-duality eventually became popular. So one could say that Aruni's non-duality was not the orthodox view of Vedanta or the Vedas. Quite counterculture, in fact. But Yājñavalkya was skilled not only as a meditator to experience that state, sometimes called niruddha, but he was also skilled at defending it from the people who resisted it because it was too foreign to what they were brought up with. So if it weren't for Yājñavalkya, it's likely that Advaita Vedanta would have never gotten off the ground. It may have come and gone like many, many other philosophies. But because of Yājñavalkya, we have the non-dual philosophy today that has in some ways become the standard. So Yājñavalkya, though he was married, one woman, her name is Maitreyi, she fell in love with the teachings of non-duality and specifically the way that Yājñavalkya taught them. The problem was she was an 18-year-old girl, and under no circumstances were 18-year-old girls allowed to learn the teachings of a Brahmin. The Brahmin caste was the highest caste of his time, and she was determined to learn anyways. And one of the ways that she came up with to get over this hump of tradition was to ask if Yājñavalkya would marry her. And as you can imagine, that was a bit of a conflict of interest with Katyayani. But Maitreyi was so determined that instead of going to Yājñavalkya, she went right to Katyayani and asked for permission to marry her husband. And as you can imagine, this definitely baffled Katyayani. But after listening carefully to Maitreyi for long enough, she realized that she was a genuine seeker, and this was what she was here to do. And she eventually allowed Maitreyi to marry her husband. And it didn't actually destroy their family or the relationship at all. Maitreyi, at some point, Katyayani eventually, after they had raised their sons, Katyayani went to a sannyasin-like phase. And it was just Yājñavalkya and Maitreyi. And eventually, Yājñavalkya longed to be with his guru Uddalaka Aruni and to renounce as well. And he told Maitreyi, I'm giving you everything I have. The cows, the farm. You can have all my wealth and you will be taken care of now for the rest of your life. And she said, what do you plan on doing? And he said, I will go to the forest with nothing but the clothes on my back. I am longing to be in a state of non-dual communion. And she expressed, well, how can I experience this non-dual communion? And he said, I'm afraid that if you're going to have cows and a farm and possessions and wealth, that these things will only steer you in the opposite direction. So my dear Maitreyi, when the time is right and you're ready to let go of these things, then you too can have that non-dual communion that you seek. And she surprised Yājñavalkya by saying, I'm ready now. If accumulating wealth and possessions will simply prevent me from having that experience, then I don't need them. Whether or not possessions and wealth prevent one from experiencing what's called asamprajñata samadhi, or the non-dual experience that Yājñavalkya pointed to skillfully in debate, is open for debate. But the ability to look at all the possessions that you have currently and to be able to walk away from them, to be able to give them away even, is not a bad place to start. Just looking at the things that you appear to own, which in a way can own us. So consider Maitreyi and her willingness to, from a very early age, to bypass all of that and go right for the non-dual experience. If you've had your legs bent this whole time in the sleeping butterfly, I would recommend that you gradually extend one leg at a time. Just allow it to straighten. Give yourself a moment to rest. If you'd like to move your arms, you can just totally leave them where they are, but if you'd like to move the arms, then consider bringing them to your sides or maybe even overhead for a moment. For a breath or two. And then roll over to one side with the help of your upper arm. And come back up to a comfortable seat. So between this pose and the next one, we're going to do a gentle movement pose called the windshield wiper. So with your hands behind you for extra stabilizing support, just allow your feet to pivot in place and your knees to move from side to side. Cool. The next time your knees come over to your left, you can just let them stay juxtaposed like this. This posture that you're seeing right here is actually a posture that the sage Ramana Maharishi was often fond of. And sometimes when you twist to the left like this, it's called the Rishi twist. I'm guessing it was probably because of him. But if you take your blanket and fold it to the normal fold and put it at the base of your bolster, I'm going to ask you to put your left thigh on that blanket so you have a little extra cushion. And either having your legs juxtaposed like this, just sit side by side, or you could put your knee like this. Please surround the bolster with your hands and let your head face the same direction as your knees. This pose can be a gentle hip flexor release, a passive psoas release, or an active one if you're moving your knee back into extension. But you can also just stack your knees, and then it'll just be a very, very subtle release for your lower back. You can move closer to the bolster, and that'll give more support to the spine, or you can move further, and that will give you more space. But I'm going to ask you to hang out here for about 3 minutes with your long exhales and this wakefulness at the very end of your exhale before the inhale begins. As you're allowing your inhales to take however long they need to, see if you can also be awake at the emptiness or the space at the top of your inhale before the exhale begins. So please be aware of the states of your breath that are neither inhale nor exhale. Here is a phrase attributed to Yājñavalkya from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It says, "Now as a man is like this or like that, according as he acts and according as he behaves, so will he be. A man of good acts will become good, a man of bad acts, bad. He becomes pure by pure deeds, bad by bad deeds." And here they say that a person consists of desires. And as is his desire, so is his will. As is his will, so is his deed. Whatever deed he does, that he will reap. So the experience of yoga, sometimes referred to as samprajñata samadhi, is the practice of observing the actions that we take, however subtle to obvious, and the consequences that they produce. Samprajñata samadhi often starts by concentrating your attention on an object like the breath, but then the object is to reorganize the activities of the mind to be free from afflictions, to redecorate your house so it's freer of clutter, to remake the world a better place so that you can not only avoid future suffering, but even bring about more desirable states of happiness, well-being. Samprajñata samadhi is time-based. And it's not exactly the non-dual state, but it's a valid form of yoga. Yājñavalkya he had quite a bit of resistance to teaching Advaita. But one of the arguments that people found convincing is that no object is self-caused. Rather, our every thought, our every word, our every action can be traced back to a prior cause. And if you trace all those causes back, it just disappears at an event horizon somewhere. And though it seems like everything is different and differentiated and maybe even self-caused, the reality is everything, the diversity of all things, can be traced back to this unseen source, this substrate of reality that he called Brahman. And to think that you are somehow special to where you can be outside of Brahman or independent of Brahman is a fantasy, a delusion that could be problematic. And non-duality is to return to reality, to see who you really are, how you really are in context. So Yājñavalkya is considered to be a rishi, a maharishi. When you're ready to come out of this side of the rishi twist, you're welcome to take your time, but please start to lift up. And in between sides, if you want to do the windshield wiper again, you're welcome to, but you don't have to. It might feel nice. But please simply switch sides. I don't have new information about the posture this time. See if you can get comfortable enough where you relax all of your muscles. Of course, you can make adjustments when needed. Continue to extend your exhales softly till there's an unforced pause that you can awaken. Allow the inhales to do whatever they need to do, but try to be aware of that pause at the top of your inhales. By contrast, asamprajñata samadhi is where you're not trying to get somewhere other than where you are right now. You're not trying to work hard for the future, but rather you're able to see the infinite past, the infinite present, and the infinite future as being right here, right now. It's a state of awe. If we're skillful enough in setting things up in such a way where we can let go and just appreciate the way it is, that's a taste of asamprajñata samadhi, or the non-dual state. Of course, there might be some contrivance at first, where we try to force ourselves to appreciate everything the way it is, even though part of our mind is not okay with it being the way it is. When the experience is genuine, that contrivance is no longer necessary. It can be genuine, authentic, automatic even. So here's the story of Gargī. Gargī was born into a lineage of great philosophers, of high-profile leaders. Her father was Gargā, hence her name being Gargī, or one of her grandfathers. And she was an incredibly intelligent woman who refused to bow down to the patriarchal structure of her society. She was born into a situation where she was not supposed to learn how to read or write, but wouldn't have it any other way. And she clearly was like a savant, like Mary Savant, who has tested with one of the highest IQs of any human being. So it's likely that Gargī was also a savant. And she would debate with Brahmin men as though she was one of the guys. Her inability to be hung up about her femaleness definitely rocked some boats in her time. But she shows up in this story where King Janaka, who is a noble king, he's a benevolent king, the best that one could hope for a king, who genuinely wants the best for himself, his family, and his community. And he is aware of Yājñavalkya's teachings on Advaita Vedanta being incredibly inspiring to people. A lot of people are very much into this take on practice. However, there's much resistance coming from the elders who reject it. So people are getting inspired by Yājñavalkya's Advaita, where they see themselves as not separate from Brahman. They realize that they are the Atman, the self, that is not separate from Brahman. And in the midst of their paradoxical lives, where they're not quite living up to their own ideals, much less anyone else's, they are having these experiences of great awe and appreciation. And though they're inspired by it, when they try to tell their peers or their elders about it, they just basically get rebuked. So King Janaka decides that he's going to solve this dilemma in his kingdom by hosting this great debate where anyone who wants to defend Advaita Vedanta successfully will end up receiving a reward of 1,000 cows. Each cow has about 10 grams worth of gold in rings that are put on the cow's horns. This will make whoever wins super rich, super wealthy. So he invites anyone and everyone, mainly Brahmins, princes, princesses, to attend. And of course, in the affirmative position, Yājñavalkya is expected to defend Advaita Vedanta. And it turns out that 8 people were able to have the strength to try to knock him off balance and rebuke or refute his position. So just 2 more breaths here on this side of the Rishi twist. When you're ready to come up this time around, you slowly take your time to rise up again. And kindly sit up on your bolster. So if you need a moment to acclimate after that, just give yourself some time to get settled once more. We're going to do a brief side stretch specifically to help improve circulation along the upper body briefly. So if you bring your left hand to the left, you can bring your right arm up and over, and just hold this for a minute. So feel the lengthening on the right side of your body, the compression on the left side. And with your longer, softer exhales, mindfulness of the transitions of the breath, feel free to lean forward and back and just notice how that feels. The bottom of the exhale before the inhale begins, and the top of the inhale before the exhale begins. If your arm's tired, you can always just rest your hand on your head, and that might not change the stretch very much. Instead of working harder, consider working smarter. When you're ready to, please come back up and rest your right arm, and try to notice the difference between the right side and the left side. Hopefully it's obvious. But see if you can also notice how that difference between the right side and the left side isn't staying the same. It's changing instant by instant, which is subtle. When you're ready to resume with the other side, please take your time, move at your leisure. Feel free to bend your supporting elbow or keep the arm straight as needed. The stretch that you're feeling hopefully is mild. If you feel a burning sensation when you're stretching, that's a sign you're going too far to back off. Just a couple more breaths on this side. When you're ready to come back up to the middle, please let your arm rest. And while you're letting things settling, noticing the obvious and the subtle differences. Just a couple of shoulder movements where you move the shoulders forward and up, and then back and down a couple times without trying to stretch. Just move your shoulders without muscle clenching if possible. Shoulder circles. I know it's hard not to clench or tense up, but you can do it. All right. Now from here, I'm going to ask you to go into one more posture. It could be the one you're in right now called Sukhasana. And if you wish, you can just ride out the rest of the practice in stillness here. Otherwise, the posture that's going to be most helpful to you is Shavasana. Shavasana can be done with the bolster underneath your knees. You are also welcome to put that blanket underneath your neck if you need extra support, or even cover yourself with the blanket if you're cold. But to hear the rest of our story, the really interesting part, try to commit your body to stillness where you do some work setting it up, samprajñata. And then once you have it all set up, everything is in a good space, sukha. Then let go, to be still, and go into a deep, intimate state with the non-dual nature of reality. Allow your body to be still in an effortless way. And the exhales to continue to be long subtle, and maybe even come to a pause that's unforced whenever it feels right. Yājñavalkya made his statement about Brahman and Atman not being two. Brahman being the substrate of all existence. Though it is invisible, it is real. In one teaching, he took salt, held it in his hand, and then he put it in a glass of water and dissolved it. And he says, "Can you see the salt now?" And the person who was trying to refute his position said, "I can't see the salt, but is it there?" He asked the person to drink from the water, and this was one of the ways that he was able to make his point, that just because you can't see it with your eyes doesn't mean that you can't sense it still. And doesn't mean that it isn't real. So Brahman, the substrate of all existence, is invisible. But it's not only from which everything has emerged, to where everything is now, to which everything will return, but you do not have the self-existent nature or intrinsic nature of being separate from Brahman. Some of the 8 Brahmins who had attempted to refute Yājñavalkya made their case, but failed. Yājñavalkya was skillful enough to answer all their questions in a satisfactory manner. It was now just one opponent that stood between him and all those cows. He told his student to go ahead and steer the cows home. And this was before Gargī had even spoken. Some people were upset that Yājñavalkya had accepted victory even before it was official. Gargī began her questioning, saying, "You say," I'm paraphrasing, "you say that everything is made of Brahman. However, it can also be said that we are all made of water. From which is water made of? What is water made of?" And Yājñavalkya responds, "More or less, water is made of something subtler, air." Not bad for a 9th century text. Hydrogen, for example, and oxygen would be components of the air, but if you combine them in a certain way, they make water. So, not bad. Gargī, however, unsatisfied, said, "Well, what is air made of?" And Yājñavalkya eventually responded, "Brahman." And Gargī replies, "Well, what is Brahman made of?" And Yājñavalkya responds, "Don't you dare ask too many questions on the topic of Brahman, or your poor little head will explode." It was at this point that Gargī realized she was at a great disadvantage being a woman, and her attempting to debate Yājñavalkya like a man with brute force to conquer her opponent wasn't working. And while she was thinking about her next approach, Uddalaka Aruni, Yājñavalkya's guru, suddenly joins in, and he says, "Yājñavalkya, Do you remember once that we learned something valuable from a woman in the forest who is possessed by Gandharva? Gandharvas are these believed to be celestial musicians that are realized beings that choose to linger and inspire those who are not yet realized through music and dancing. Yājñavalkya, who clearly is in a man's world where he knows that he's got privilege and power, and that a woman refuting him and preventing him from claiming his prize is just a nuisance. But Udalaka Runi, his teacher, is like saying, wait a minute, there might be something really valuable to learn here. Don't write her off just because she's a woman. The reason that he uses is because they met a Gandharva that was possessing a woman that they learned something from. Is a little bit sketchy, but I mean, that's what it is. So after this interlude where Udalaka is advising Yājñavalkya to be a little bit more open-minded, this time Gargī comes back, and instead of fighting harder, she fights smarter. So instead of attempting to conquer Yājñavalkya, she does something else. So instead of debating Yājñavalkya, she turns to the crowd and she says, none of you will be able to defeat Yājñavalkya if he can successfully answer these two questions. This perplexed Yājñavalkya because now she was no longer making him the person that she needed to answer to. Instead, she turned to the crowd and made the crowd who he needed to answer to. And she says, I know if he will be able to do it. Let's see if he knows. So Yājñavalkya responds and said, okay, Gargī, please ask your two questions. Let's see what you got. And her first question, O Yājñavalkya, that which is above the sky, that which is beneath the earth, that which is between these two, sky and earth, that which people call the past and the present and the future, across what is it woven? Space, replied Yājñavalkya. Gargī replies, well, that clears that up. Not. Across what is space woven? Across what is space woven? And Yājñavalkya responds, oh, Gargī, if one performs sacrifices and worship and undergoes austerity in this world for many thousands of years, but without knowing Brahman, then limited indeed is that work of his. Across this Brahman, the unseen, O Gargī, is space woven. She said, okay, my second question. Lastly, upon what is Brahman woven? So realizing that Yājñavalkya needs to answer this question to the satisfaction of the crowd, not just the Gargī, Yājñavalkya similarly says, one cannot simply understand Brahman through intellectual questioning. Atman and Brahman are not two. Tat Twamasi. There was an experience that happened, a silence. Where Gargī stared into the eyes of Yājñavalkya. Yājñavalkya stared into the eyes of Gargī. And though they could see that they were separate in one sense, there was a sensed experience that they were arising from the same source and one and the same. This was felt not only by Gargī and Yājñavalkya, but everyone there in the crowd. The silence was very profound and deep. Eventually, Gargī said, that Yājñavalkya was victorious. And went on to befriend Yājñavalkya. And through joining him, rather than trying to refute him and make him wrong, but through joining him, was she able to be not only one of the greatest savants in philosophy, but despite the fact that she was a woman living in a man's world that was not necessarily working in favor of her freedom to teach and to guide. So great respect to Gargī. May you, however you wish to be in this world, not give up despite the millions of things that could easily stop you. And may you not only work hard to make the world a better place for yourself and for everyone else, but may you also have the ability in any moment to see the infinite past, present, and future right here, right now, all the possibilities right here, right now, and perhaps experience the awe and the beauty of this moment, just as it is. Feel free to invite some movement again into your fingers, your toes. Of course, you can linger longer in Shavasana or Sukhasana if you are enjoying the stillness. But if you'd like to, please consider coming back up to a comfortable seat and joining me in this mantra one more time. A mantra for continuing to cultivate compassion, kindness, gratitude, and patience. Not only because it will yield good results down the road and improve your quality of life, but rather as a way of being in harmony with the totality of all there is right now. So feel free to join me if you want. In a way, light is all there is. From the Big Bang, all of us, every atom in our body was formed in the heart of a star. Light is what illuminates the world around us, within. The light in me honors the same light in you. Namaste. Thank you so much.